Trunk from the front to the back.
What it do, YouTube? I'm about to react to something. Well, to somebody that one of my I think one of my subscribers. I'm gonna try to put you on the screen. But yeah, I'm gonna react to something that he told me that I should react to. The guy name that he told me to make a reaction on. Well, not who, but who to make a reaction on. His name is Omar. I've been said. I know this name is this is a Muslim name, but he's supposed to be some type of black guy. I don't really know much about him. I've probably heard of him maybe once, but yeah, I don't really know much of him. I'm gonna try to find a shorter reaction. I'm gonna if the video get decent amount of views, then I'm gonna make a longer one. But yeah, let me just get this video right here, and then switch scenes. Don't play nothing yet. All right.
For many descendants of American slaves, the history of what came before is forgotten. The names of their ancestors, their place of origin, their culture. Relatively few were able to provide any remembrance of their life before being enslaved, and far fewer were able to provide that in writing, in their own words. But one man from a forgotten African land did his best, writing several treatises on theology and history, and notably his own biography, in Arabic. He was one of the estimated around 10% of enslaved Africans who came to the United States who were Muslim. The Futa Torah scholar, Omar ibn Said, deserves.
Said, I said, but Omar ibn Said. I didn't know how to say his name, so don't butcher me. I'm not Muslim or really pay attention to anything Arab or any type of Arabic name. I will always say it wrong, but people will correct me. So yeah, I didn't know how to say his name.
The Futa Torah scholar, Omar ibn Said, deserves to be remembered. The exact date of Omar's birth is uncertain, but it is thought to be around 1770, based on his own account, where he was born into a wealthy family in the region of Futa Toro, a region encompassing fertile lands along part of the Senegal River, now the border between Senegal and Mauritania. The land and culture that Omar would grow up in is itself a bit of forgotten history. Almost 50 years before his birth, the first Islamic-inspired uprisings began in West Africa, supported by local Muslims and Muslim traders that overthrew indigenous chiefdoms that had their own indigenous religions. The first imamate was founded south of Futa Torah at Futa Jalan, which would inspire other Muslims to establish their own religious states. Between 1769 and 1776, the Muslims overthrew the Empire of Great Fulo and established their own imamate. Omar was a Fula, today still a large ethnic group of West Africa, who speak a group of languages called Fulani. The term Futa is a term given to any land in which the Fula people reside. They were among the first people in the region to convert to Islam in large numbers in West Africa. The term imamate was
I'm gonna be honest with y'all, I did not know that.
Itself borrowed from the Arabic al-imam, meaning one who leads in prayer. In its earliest years and in the childhood of Omar, the imamate banned the slave trade on the Senegal River and even obtained an agreement by the French to stop trading in Muslim slaves. The place of slavery in Islam in its culture of West Africa was somewhat complex, but it was generally believed that those who believed in Islam could not be made slave for any reason. But this almost always required them to believe in Islam before they became enslaved. Conversion was not a means of emancipation. To complicate that, slavery was widely practiced against prisoners captured in war in the region. While Islamic forces generally would not enslave other Muslims, non-Muslim groups had no such compunctions and often forced captured Muslims.
My bad, y'all. I just wanted to make sure my audio was straight, because I'm looking at my Streamlabs, and it was stuck for a second.
Into slavery. We know that Omar was a member of a wealthy family, although we know little else about who they were. His name, Ibn Said, means son of Said, and he gives his mother's name as Yaznik. In his autobiography, he relates that he was born in Futur, between the two rivers, those being the Senegal River and the Gambia River. An 1854 article on Uncle Moreau in the North Carolina University magazine, supposedly having consulted him, reports that his father owned as many as 70 slaves, and that his father was killed when Omar was only 5 years old. He describes his years before enslavement briefly, but that he continued seeking knowledge for 25 years, learning under a series of sheikhs. This makes him a scholar, and he likely learned widely about things like mathematics, astronomy, and theology. And that he came to my place, where he stayed for 6 years. The 1854 article says instead that he became a trader, and does a later article written by Reverend William Plummer, who claims to have first met Omar in 1826. Omar replies in his autobiography that he may have traveled to Mecca and used to join the jihad every year against the infidels, but it's unclear if these references were describing things he actually did or only listing Islamic tenets. He also stated that some considered him to be a pray God to a king, a job that would have meant that he was offering prayers on the ruler's behalf. Then there came to our country a big army and killed many people. It took me and walked me to the big sea and sold me into the hand of a Christian man who bought me and walked me to the big ship in the big sea. The 1854 article simply says that some event occurred, which he is very reluctant to refer to. The ship he traveled on appears to have been the Heart of Oak, which took 439 captives across the sea. At least 109 of those died during the voyage. This is all the information that Omar gives us about what happened before he became a slave. What is most important to the rest of his story is that he was already an educated and accomplished man. He had learned with great scholars and spoke and wrote a language that his eventual captors did not. It isn't clear what conflict led to his capture either. The Al-Mami of Futa Torah, Abdul Qadir, had been aggressively expansionist and fought against his neighbors, but was defeated and captured during an invasion of other states around 1797. While he was released, his power and expansionism were curtailed.
If y'all hear somebody in the background, that's just my grandma yelling into the phone like she can't talk normal or something.
Local chiefs had power through the imamate, while the al-Mami position became progressively more ceremonial. Qadir died in 1806, and by then the state was dominated by a handful of families. The state was surrounded by foes, however, including non-Muslim kingdoms as well as the growing influence of the French. It's likely that the attackers were not Muslims, since Muslims like Omar were sold into slavery, but Omar gives us no information about who his attackers were. According to Omar, he stayed at sea for a month and a half before they arrived at Charleston, South Carolina, where he was sold to a weak, small, evil man called Johnson. Omar claims that he is a small man who cannot do hard work, and apparently because he was put to work in the field, the 37-year-old man escaped, rather than continue to be held in bondage. He was held at Charlottesville on a rice plantation for probably 2 years before escaping around 1810, but Omar was far from home, and he likely spoke little English. He was recaptured by a man called Hinda, probably by a chase party looking for escaped slaves, and taken to a place he identified as Fidel, probably Fayetteville, North Carolina, a distance of about 200 miles. He was held there in jail for 16 days and nights. He was also said to have filled the walls of his room with piteous petitions to be released in Arabic. He was eventually resold into slavery. The first man who came to buy him was a man called Mitchell, who asked, "Would you walk to a place called Charleston?" Omar's answer was, "No, no, 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 no." Instead, he went with a Bob Mumford. Mumford's daughter Betsy, wife of Jim Owen, asked, "Do you consent to walk to a place called Bladen, a county south of Fayetteville?" And he agreed. James Owen was a wealthy landowner and president of the Wilmington and Weldon Railroad. He would remain a slave of the Owens for the remainder of his life. During this time, he was called Moro or Moreau or sometimes Omaro. He speaks well of the Owens, who he says are righteous men who do not beat me, nor calls me bad names, nor subjects me to hunger, nakedness, or hard work, for I am a small, ill man. In 1819, John Lewis Taylor, the first Chief Justice of the North Carolina Supreme Court, sent an odd letter to Francis Scott Key, the writer of the Star-Spangled Banner. Taylor hoped that Key would be able to obtain a translation of the letter, written in Arabic. It's unclear how Taylor received the letter or why he thought Key could obtain a translation. Written while he was held in slavery by Owen, it is the earliest piece of Omar's writing that is still extant. He offers a conveyance of greeting to Major John Owen, brother of Jim, and whosoever is with them from among the community of Christians in the place called Raleigh. John Owen would later be governor of North Carolina from 1828 to 1830. It also contains geometric designs that seem to include the name of Jim Owen. The same design appears in other documents listing members of the Owen family. A biographical sketch was written about him in the Christian Advocate newspapers as early as 1825. Most notable
Bear with me in my laptop. It's going through it at the moment. I got a lot of things running on it, so try to bear with me in it.
There's a line where Omar expresses his desire to return home. I wish to be seen in our land called Africa, in a place on the river. Throughout the rest of the text, he quotes numerous lines.
If you notice my screen blinked off, it's probably because I just plugged the charger cord into it, but yeah.
From the Quran, as well as other apparent theological musings. Francis Scott Key did help the Owens obtain a copy of the Bible in Arabic, and the Owens obtained an English translation of the Quran for him. He was officially converted to Christianity in 1820, baptized by a Reverend Dr. Snodgrass. His actual conversion has been brought into question by later scholars. While Omar says that in his autobiography that he now recites the Lord's Prayer and the report that there are a few Sabbaths in the year in which he is absent from the house of God, he continued to quote the Quran, and his English Bible contains dedications to Muhammad. In 1857, Card has a passage which refers to the conversion of non-Muslims in multitudes, although the writing was misidentified on the card as an Arabic rendering of the Lord's Prayer. Later historians and textual analysis find that Omar was more ambiguous in his writing than contemporary viewers seem to understand. It was, after all, to his benefit to convert to Christianity, which would have been necessary if he wanted to be freed. He was also happily paraded by other Christians, proud of his conversion. The 1854 North Carolina University article records him saying his coming to this country was all for good, and that his old beliefs were supplanted in his heart by the better faith. But his writings actually never contradict Muslim faith either. He echoes Christian maxims without ever expressing belief in the things that separate the two dogmas. Others question the extent of his education. Despite his stated 25 years of education, his writing is rudimentary and contains numerous apparent errors. Some of this can be explained by the fact that the 1819 text was written 12 years after his capture, his biography 24 years later, and by the fact that his education likely emphasized only copying passages from the Quran and not necessarily learning the language. It was in 1831 that Omar wrote his biography. Someone asked him to do it, as he writes at the beginning of his writing, for Sheikh Hunter. No other information is known on who precisely this Hunter was. It was 5 years later that Omar's text was sent to Old Paul.
My bad, my grandma had called me.
Precisely this Hunter was. It was 5 years later that Omar's text was sent to Old Paul, another Fula and former slave, called Laman Kebi, where it was presented to Theodore Dwight and printed. The first English translation was not printed until 1848, translated by Alexander Cattell, who was in awe of Omar's command of Arabic. Where is the youth, or even the adult, among the mass of our people who is able to do the same in Greek or Latin? Cattell asked. Omar wrote many other things in his life as well, though much shorter, and around 14 examples of his writing survive, including Arabic versions of the Lord's Prayer. Other writings may have existed. Several letters are quoted, but the originals have never been found. A missionary in Syria claimed to find in 1868 a book that was written by Omar in 1860, which included a plea for his countrymen to convert. But the original, if it exists, hasn't been found. Omar doesn't seem to have desired to return to Africa after he found relative ease with the Owens. He told us support of African colonization in 1837 that he thinks his age and infirmities forbid his return to his own country. His health seems to have suffered on the journey to America, and he may never have been particularly healthy. Even in the 1830s, in his 60s, he was often described as infirm. If freed, he had little means of supporting himself. Another fear might have been whether his family or his home even still existed. In fact, food at Torah would cease to exist in 1861. Conflict was common between the French and other forces well before that. His education led to his description in multiple articles as a prince. Though apparently not true, it offered an explanation for his intelligence, as well as odd racial explanations that argued that he was an Arab by birth and not African after all. He was often used by the African Colonization Society as proof of African intelligence and in support of their cause. Despite all those indications of ill health, Omar lived a remarkably long life. At the outset of the Civil War, the Owens moved him from Wilmington to another plantation at Cape Fear, where he finally passed away in 1864. And while the circumstances surrounding his death are unclear, if his birth date was correct, that would have made him 94 years old. His autobiography was translated in full in 1925 in a journal, but sometime shortly after that the original copy was lost and only rediscovered in 1995. The original is now held by the Library of Congress. Omar's work is completely unique. It is the only American slave narrative written in Arabic known to exist, and it does represent the relatively forgotten history of Islamic belief among the American enslaved. But what perhaps is most interesting about it is that unlike other slave narratives, it was completely unedited by the people who held him in bondage because it was written in a language that they couldn't read. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the History Guy.
Alright, oh, wrong one. I hope y'all enjoy this. Well, I hope people who like learning enjoy this, because I never even heard of dude until one of the dudes in my comments brought him up. But yeah, if you do enjoy, please like, comment, subscribe. It's been your boy KTV. I'm out of here, deuces.